Welcome back, my friends. 23 minutes past 7 o'clock on a Friday morning. Good morning and welcome to Talk. Of course, we've talked about the Thailand submersible, those 5 souls losing their lives yesterday. We'll do more of that. The other big news, though, of course, yesterday was that the cost of borrowing rose for the 13th time in a row to 5%, the highest since 2008. And we know what happened in 2008. Crash, bang, wallop. I was struck, I have to say, yesterday. Our Prime Minister, the man that we all, whatever our political persuasion would look up to, stood up and said, I'm not cutting taxes. I'm absolutely 100% on it. Now, I understand all the economic arguments, but I'm going to read a text to you this morning from Ellie. Jezza, when I watched Sunak yesterday say, even I have to budget my expenses, I felt physically sick. I cannot believe how patronising that is. Absolutely no idea, she says, of how normal people like me have to live. Does he understand that I am scared? Scared that I will not be able to pay my bills. Scared that I might not be able to keep my home. And that is what many people are saying to us this morning, because however much politicians try and dress things up, at least try and look like you give a damn, because that then is how people move forward. Joining me now is Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at the University of Sheffield and former advisor to Chancellor and PM Gordon Brown. Michael, welcome to Talk Breakfast. How are you?
Good morning.
Do you understand, first up, the sort of text that Ellie sent? Because people are absolutely terrified. And before, we don't need to get into a big political debate about where the money's going, but the 13th time on the row and this continued rhetoric about inflation, I get all of that, but the layman, the lay person, I should say, in a politically correct way, on the everywhere across this country wants more right now because they're struggling, Michael.
Absolutely. And this is a crisis not just for those who are facing mortgage rises, payment rises, which of course is what we focused on for the last 24 hours because of the Bank of England's interest rate rise, but people are renting because those mortgage interest payments feed into rents, and rents are rising even faster than mortgages are. So this is a crisis, is an absolute cost of living crisis for pretty much everybody, whether you're a mortgage payer or a renter. And that makes it incredibly difficult. And there is huge pressure now on the government to act.
Who's to blame, Michael?
Well, the initial impetus for this rise in prices was, of course, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And that was what first kicked up energy prices, as well as the consequences of the pandemic. Some of that was some of the rise in energy prices was before the invasion. Since then, prices have risen because of the follow-on effect. So when energy prices rise, businesses find that their costs have risen, so they raise their prices. Then workers say, well, look, we need a bit more money to compensate for the higher cost of living, so they raise their wages and so on. So this is now something which has become embedded in the economy. There are some other reasons why the UK has higher inflation than other countries in Europe, which we do. We have a tighter labour market, and we have the impact of Brexit, it has to be said, which has raised our import costs and made it harder for the UK economy to grow. So there's a number of reasons. And of course, you have to add to that the effects of the so-called mini-budget of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, which raised interest rates and made markets very nervous about the government. And of course, that's what, again, we've seen recently with interest rates in markets being that they're charging the government for borrowing rising. So this is now a lot of factors combining to raise the prices that we feel in the shops.
Bringing Benedict in as well, I can sit here, gentlemen, and I can say, look, I want to hear from my Prime Minister at this moment in time. I don't care about... And of course, there are many sides to all the... Listen to this from Jade. Jeremy, why the hell should us taxpayers pay people's mortgages when it's difficult? It was their choice to buy a house. You've got to take that side as well. When do we stop helping? But at the same time, should we not be helping when it's difficult? But then, yeah. I know this. I've just had a text from somebody who went, Jeremy, I'm really, really sorry for these people, but I remember interest rates at 15%. You've got to get your head down and graph. It's difficult, isn't it?
I mean, that was at a time, though, I think...
1831, I think it was.
Yeah, also your pound carried a lot more weight in your pocket than it does. Wages were higher than they were relatively, and other things were actually lower, food prices, etc. And I think it's difficult. I mean, Rachel Reeves, I think, has already come out and said that the Labour Party would not provide support for people because actually it doesn't solve the crisis to just, the government pick up the slack and add on to the debt and therefore add on to the interest that we're already paying 10% of GDP on interest on our debt. at the moment. It's unsustainable. And I think, Labour understands as well as anybody else, you can't just say, oh, yeah, that's fine, the government
which is actually where we're at in politics, because when the Tory government got in 13 years ago, there was no money left. I mean, it's very interesting for me that the Labour Party is, through Rachel Reeves, and Michael, I'll share this with you, is actually not doing what the Labour Party in the past has said, which is, we'll just spend this. And they're actually saying somebody needs to take a serious long look at this. What I'm asking you both, I guess, is what do we do about people right now?
Well, I think that there is one source of money. So there is a scheme which has not been used very much. It's called Support for Mortgage Interest, which can be targeted on people on the lowest incomes. There are now a lot of people who are effectively insolvent. Their mortgage payments that are now larger than their income, and they are in real trouble. And there is a scheme which I think government could beef up, which would support people with interest payments effectively to provide them to extend their loans so that they can have lower interest payments now. I would like to see government do that. And in response to the completely correct point that where would the money come from if it just adds to borrowing, it just adds to government's interest costs, I would now have a tax on the wealthiest people. I think in the hardest times, the people with the broadest shoulders need to pay more. And there is money to be made now, to be taxed. A lot of people have benefited hugely.
But that age old, but Michael, that age,
let me just finish. And in the price of shares and so on. So the very wealthy have become much wealthier. I think they're the people who should now be asked to contribute to make it easier for people at the bottom.
The problem is that's the age-old argument, and we'll all have different opinions as to democracy. The problem is then the wealthiest will say there's no reason for me to stay in the United Kingdom. I'm already paying 40.
Well, that's simply not true, Jeremy. It really isn't true. The evidence doesn't show that a little bit of extra tax to people who are extremely wealthy and who've become
What does a little bit of extra mean? Give me some facts. What does that mean?
I'm suggesting, for example, a 1% tax on wealth over £2 million. So not a huge amount of money.
Assets or money in the bank?
Sorry?
Assets or money in the bank?
Assets and money in the bank, which is what several countries do. And you could make it 5 million if you wanted the threshold. So let's say 5 million. And you could raise several billion that way. If you want to know the figures, the London School of Economics has got a wealth tax commission, which has a little calculator where you can actually put in different tax rates with different thresholds, and you can see how much money would be raised. And the point is, these are people who live in the UK because they like the UK. And they are not going to move. This is what the evidence says, because we've tried this in the past. The evidence does not suggest that large numbers of people would move, therefore you wouldn't be able to collect the tax. That's just not the case.
OK, Benedict, let's take that point, 1% extra over 5 million. Can I also add to my question almost what the text said? Why, if we're saying the government shouldn't bail these people out, why should more successful bail them out? Answer me that.
The only answer is because you need to find a source of income, and that you need to you just need to find it from somewhere. The rectitude of it, I think, slightly goes out of the window. But I think the point that's being made about people moving abroad, in the past, I think that has been correct. Not so many people decide to leave the country, but increasingly I do worry that it wouldn't be the case long term as the elite, if you like, become more globalized, more internationally minded. And actually, as services begin to crumble and standards of living, generally speaking, in the UK, do begin to decline, and things like the quality of schools, even private schools, actually don't quite match up to what they used to in comparison to other countries, and more options become available, I'm not so sure that that's going to be the case. One thing that we do need to think about, actually, is increasingly how poor the UK is compared to its main competitors, much more so than it used to be. I think if you wanted to keep people like that, I don't think it's the worst idea necessarily in the world, but if you wanted to do this, a wealth tax of some sort, or a property tax, land tax, you need to balance it out. And I would do that by also scrapping something like inheritance tax, which actually kicks in a long way down the line. For a lot of these people, it's not something that's going to affect them for 20, 30 years, but it's a sort of a goodwill gesture to say, OK, we're going to rob you now, but in the future, you'll make it back, so to speak.
Michael?
Well, inheritance tax is a tax that unfortunately is largely avoided by the very rich who would be affected by the wealth tax proposal that I made. There are so many ways of exempting yourself that what actually happens is that the rich pay inheritance tax, the very rich don't. And of course, the threshold is very high. So most of us never pay inheritance tax. It's about 4 or 5% of estates pay inheritance tax. So I don't think that's a particularly helpful scheme. And in general, in a cost of living crisis, my priority wouldn't be to help the richest people. It would be to say your wealth is a part of our society. You can't simply exempt yourself from the rest of society. And this is the moment we most need a bit more from you. My focus would be on the people at the bottom and helping those. And I think we could make universal credit a bit more generous. We could, as I say, beef up the scheme that we've already got, which is support for mortgage interest. And I think we can ask the building societies and banks to try and extend mortgages, which so that.
What about? Can I jump in as I've listened? Can I jump in as I've listened to you both speak? Great sense-ish. Do you not think there should be some responsibility with the bloody mortgage companies who have been lending people money left, right and bleed and centre, money that actually essentially they now can't afford to pay back, irrespective of the markets? And let me read you something else as well from David in Leicester, directly for you, Michael. Your economist from Sheffield Uni is towing the political line about Liz Truss. What really spooked the markets was the fact that pension schemes very nearly went bust due to unwise investments. It was a convenient excuse to blame that on Truss, as she was politically assassinated because Sunak was supposed to win, not her. Michael Jacobs, your response?
I just don't think that's true. There was a particular problem at the same time which occurred, that when the rates of interest rose as a result of the so-called mini budget of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, then we found that a lot of pension funds had invested unwisely and the Bank of England had to bail them out. So that definitely happened. But the initial rise in interest rates occurred because the markets looked at the government's budget and said, you're introducing unfunded tax cuts. So what you're doing is you're just going to borrow more. And so what we had a situation was government was going to borrow more, not to invest, which markets might have said, well, that will yield growth, so we can live with that, but simply for tax cuts and largely for better off people. And the market said, we just don't think this is going to work economically. And if you're going to borrow quite a lot more, about 100 billion more it was, we're going to charge you more for that. That's a natural reaction of the markets, and that occurred before the failure of the pension fund. So I don't think it's quite correct, that point.
All right, very quickly, Benedict, thank you both very much indeed for now. Benedict, sum it up.
I mean, it's a very difficult thing, because if you want to find that cash without borrowing, you're going to have to end up robbing somebody. And I know that he's gone, but I know that what Michael was saying about, the super rich don't pay inheritance tax, but, it's sort of middle incomes do, and that we should go after property and wealth. About a quarter of pensioners in the UK are millionaires now, but just because of the value of their house. It actually sucks in a lot of people if you were to go after a tax on, say, assets over $1 million, even $2 million.
And Benedict, I have to say that the fear, and I don't care whether people dislike what I'm about to say, the fear that the British electorate have about Labour's real plans, which dissipates when you hear comments like Rachel Reeves has already admitted that they're not going to promise to print money and just create, money and further problems down the line. But when you hear Michael saying, let's tax the wealthy, whether he likes this or not, we have to look at both views. There is absolutely no doubt that that's quite right, that all the middle classes will go, whoa. Can I just say to Mick, brilliant, we're going to go to a phone call in a minute. Mick says, to fix broken Britain, ask Benedict what he thinks. We need to sack the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Governor of the Bank of England, the Police Commissioner, all the judges. We need to get rid of the House of Lords. We need to send Mick Lynch to a small island, and listening to brainwashing academics like that's doing my head in.
I'd like to see his list for their replacements. I also want to keep the judges. A lot of judges are actually quite straightforward. I think he's talking about judges in the European Court of Human Rights who we don't actually
Maybe judges on X Factor, I don't know. Let's go to Lincolnshire. Harvey, you're on Talk Breakfast. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you. Morning, everybody there. Listen, it's not rocket science. I don't know. You keep going round and round in circles. Food, the cost of food. And it's simple. Why has the price of food gone up? Do any of you out there realise how much food's going into food banks? Who's paying for it? Food banks. Who's paying for all that food that nobody start shouting and screaming. The scroungers that don't need to work, don't want to work, they've got a bad back, they've got a mobility card, they go into the food banks. What about the food that's going out the back door? I know it's going out the back door. It's not rocket science. Watch them on car boots knocking all that food out. Well, they're not going to the cash and carry to fetch it from. You need to do an investigation into food banks. It's a scam. That's where our prices are going through the roof in the shops, because someone's got to subsidise all this food that people are queuing up and taking from food banks. It's a scam.
Harvey, what do you do, Harvey?
What do you do?
No, I said what do you do, man? What do you do?
Well, I'm self-employed, and the judge said to me 3 weeks ago, Harvey, you're an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for 44 years. I'm a penny pinching, no good for nothing. But I know the country's in a mess, and I know there's a lot of scams going on out there, JK, and you need to investigate the food banks. The amount of food. I mean, look at a bag of potatoes. £30 for a bag of potatoes. Your government slung all of my fellow colleagues out to should have been picking food and fruit out of the fields in Lincoln and sent them back home. And they were £6 a bag 6 months ago. You lot, the government, you're just a wasted dog.
Right, calm down. Thank you, Harvey in Lincolnshire. Very much. Oh, dear me. People say I get angry. 7:45. I mean, well, 20 to 8. I mean, Harvey. I thought the interesting thing about Harvey was, and I'm always trying to be honest. I won't be disrespectful. 0344 499 1000. The takeout from that call was the judge said to me 3 weeks ago. This is Talk Breakfast.